The diplomatic vessel, Astra Concordia, glided silently through the star-speckled void, its sleek hull reflecting the distant light of foreign suns. Within its polished corridors, humanity's representatives to the Galactic Council moved with purpose, each aware of the weight their actions carried for Earth's standing among the cosmic community. Ethan Vale adjusted his formal attire one last time before the mirror in his quarters. His deep blue uniform, adorned with the silver insignia of Earth's Cultural Relations Corps, felt uncomfortably tight around his neck. As a communications officer with barely 2 years of interstellar experience, he hadn't expected to be thrust into tonight's critical diplomatic function. Cultural Relations Officer Vale. The ship's AI announced through the room speakers, "Your presence is requested in the Grand Dome in 15 minutes. Ambassador Chen's sudden illness has elevated you to primary liaison for the Zillion delegation." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Understood," he replied, masking his anxiety with practiced composure. He'd studied dozens of alien cultures during his accelerated training, but the Zillions were notoriously complex, their social protocols layered with meanings that shifted according to subtle contextual cues. He quickly accessed his datapad, scanning through his hastily downloaded notes on Zillion etiquette. Their written language alone had 3 different scripts, depending on formality level, and their spoken tongue relied heavily on musical inflections. In his determination to make a good impression, Ethan had memorized several phrases he hoped would demonstrate respect for their culture. The Grand Dome was the Astra Concordia's crowning achievement in design, a vast hemispherical chamber whose transparent ceiling revealed the majesty of space above. Ethan entered to find the room already buzzing with diplomatic activity. Representatives from a dozen worlds mingled beneath softly glowing orbs that hovered at various heights, casting a dreamlike ambiance over the gathering. Circular tables adorned with exotic flora from multiple worlds dotted the periphery, laden with culinary offerings that represented the diverse palates of the attending species. The central area remained open for formal introductions and the inevitable ceremonial exchanges that accompanied such gatherings. Commander Hart, the ship's imposing executive officer, intercepted Ethan near the entrance. Her stern expression suggested she was as pleased with the last-minute substitution as Ethan himself. "Officer Vale," she said, her voice low and clipped. "The Zillion delegation is our priority tonight. Their support in the upcoming council vote could determine Earth's status for the next decade. I expect nothing less than perfect protocol adherence." "Yes, Commander," Ethan replied, straightening his posture. "I've been reviewing their customs. I believe I can—" "Belief isn't sufficient, Vale. Ambassador Chen spent years cultivating these relationships. You have 1 evening to maintain them." She glanced over his shoulder and nodded slightly. "They've arrived. Remember, the Zillions value authenticity above all, even if it's authentically awkward. Make us proud." Before Ethan could respond, Commander Hart had already moved to intercept another group of dignitaries, leaving him alone to face his diplomatic trial by fire. The Zillion delegation entered with characteristic grace. Their tall, slender forms moved as if perpetually caught in a gentle breeze, their iridescent skin catching and refracting the room's ambient light. Most striking were their eyes, large multifaceted organs that seemed to shift color with their emotions. At their head walked Ambassador Thrall, distinguished by the elaborate ceremonial cloak that draped from his shoulders to the floor. Behind him followed 4 other Zillions, each adorned according to their station. The last in the procession, Ethan noted, wore simpler attire that marked her as a cultural attaché, presumably his counterpart and potentially his most important ally in navigating the evening. Ethan approached with measured steps, stopping at precisely the culturally appropriate distance, close enough to show interest, far enough to demonstrate respect for personal space. He placed his right hand over his heart and inclined his head at the angle his briefing had specified. "Esteemed Ambassador Thrall," he began in standard galactic, "the Astra Concordia welcomes you and your distinguished delegation. I am Cultural Relations Officer Ethan Vale, at your service while Ambassador Chen recovers. The ambassador's faceted eyes shifted to a contemplative amber as he returned the gesture. Officer Vale, he replied, his voice carrying the musical quality characteristic of his species. We were informed of the change. We trust Ambassador Chen's ailment is not serious. A temporary discomfort only, thankfully. He sends his deepest regrets at missing this opportunity to strengthen the bonds between our peoples. Ambassador Thrall nodded, seemingly satisfied with the response. Then we shall proceed in good faith. Allow me to present my delegation. He gestured elegantly to each member in turn, providing names and titles that Ethan committed carefully to memory. And finally, the ambassador continued, our cultural attaché Lyra, who will assist with any questions regarding our customs and protocols. Ethan turned his attention to the female Zillion at the end of the line. Up close, he could see that her iridescent skin held a faint, bluish hue, and her multifaceted eyes currently displayed a curious violet color. Unlike the others, whose expressions remained diplomatically neutral, Lyra's face seemed more openly inquisitive. It is an honor to meet you, Cultural Attaché Lyra, Ethan said, repeating the formal gesture. Then, drawing upon his hastily learned Zillion, he attempted to add a personal touch, Vintal Mora Saitla, Nevabren Clusteria. The effect was instantaneous and utterly unexpected. Lyra's eyes widened dramatically, shifting to a bright pink hue. Her iridescent skin flushed with a deep purple that spread rapidly across her face and neck. She made a choking sound, her slender hand flying to her throat as she stumbled backward a step. The other Zillions froze their own eyes, flashing through a sequence of colors too rapid for Ethan to interpret. Ambassador Thrall's posture stiffened his cloak, seeming to bristle with an energy of its own. Ethan stood paralyzed, his mind racing through possible interpretations of this reaction. Had he unknowingly threatened her, insulted the delegation, violated some sacred taboo? Commander Hart materialized at his side with alarming speed. "What happened?" she demanded under her breath. "I don't know," Ethan whispered back, maintaining his diplomatic smile through sheer force of will. "I just complimented her in Zillion. I said, when you eat your lips move like a star dancer. It was meant as a cultural appreciation." Hart's expression could have frozen nitrogen. "And you learned this phrase where exactly?" "The ship's cultural database. It was listed under dining compliments." By now, Lyra had regained some composure, though her skin still pulsed with waves of purple. She exchanged rapid words with Ambassador Thrall in their native tongue, too quick and nuanced for Ethan's limited understanding to follow. The ambassador turned back to Ethan, his eyes now a cold metallic blue. "Officer Vale," he said, each word precisely measured, "it appears there has been a significant misunderstanding. The phrase you attempted to convey has a different meaning than you perhaps intended." "I offer my sincerest apologies," Ethan said, immediately heat rising to his own face. "Please understand that any offense was completely unintentional." "Intent is relevant but not sufficient," Ambassador Thrall replied. "Cultural Attaché Lyra has explained that you likely accessed outdated linguistic data. The phrase you uttered is now understood as—" He paused, searching for appropriate standard galactic terminology. "A sexually provocative proposition of considerable intimacy." The blood drained from Ethan's face. Behind him, he could practically feel Commander Hart's silent fury radiating like a supernova. Furthermore, the ambassador continued, "Such a proposition spoken in formal company constitutes the first stage of our Lumina bonding ritual, a declaration of romantic and physical interest that carries significant spiritual and legal implications." Ethan felt the room begin to spin slightly. In one sentence, he had apparently not only made an inappropriate advance, but also initiated some form of Zillion marriage proposal, all within the first 3 minutes of meeting. Ambassador Thrall's voice lowered to a more private register. "This situation requires careful resolution. Cultural attaché Lyra is understandably discomfited, as such declarations are normally reserved for those who have established deep personal connections over considerable time. Ambassador, Commander Hart interjected smoothly, please accept our profound apologies for this cultural misstep. Officer Vale is relatively new to interspecies diplomacy and clearly accessed obsolete reference materials. Perhaps we might suggest a brief recess for your delegation to confer, after which Officer Vale will of course issue a formal retraction and apology. The ambassador's eyes shifted to a contemplative purple. A formal retraction would indeed be appropriate. However, our customs require such matters to be addressed personally. Officer Vale must speak with Cultural Attaché Lyra privately to resolve the situation. Ethan nodded quickly. Of course, Ambassador. I would be grateful for the opportunity to personally apologize to Cultural Attaché Lyra for my mistake. Very well. Ambassador Thrall gestured to Lyra, who stepped forward, her skin still showing faint traces of purple embarrassment. The observation deck on level 5 would provide suitable privacy for such a conversation. We shall continue with the reception in your absence. As Ethan prepared to follow Lyra from the Grand Dome, Commander Hart caught his arm. Fix this, she whispered urgently. The Alliance depends on smooth relations with the Zillions. Do whatever it takes to make this right. The observation deck was mercifully empty when they arrived. One entire wall consisted of transparent aluminum, providing a breathtaking view of the starscape beyond. Lyra moved gracefully to stand before the vast window, her slender silhouette outlined against the cosmic backdrop. For several moments, neither spoke. Ethan searched for the right words, acutely aware that another cultural misstep could further complicate an already disastrous situation. Cultural Attaché Lyra, he finally began. I cannot adequately express my remorse for the inappropriate comment I made. It was born of ignorance, not disrespect. Lyra turned to face him, her multifaceted eyes, now a calm blue with hints of violet. Officer Vale, she replied, her voice melodic, even in Standard Galactic. Your apology is acknowledged. I recognize that you intended no offense. The database I accessed must have been severely outdated. Ethan continued, relief washing through him at her reasonable tone. I was trying to show appreciation for Zillion culture. A flicker of what might have been amusement crossed Lyra's features. The phrase you used was indeed a cultural appreciation of sorts, just not the kind appropriate for a diplomatic function. She paused. In fact, that particular expression hasn't been used in polite company for at least 3 generations. It comes from an ancient courting ritual, when our society was much more direct about certain matters. Ethan felt his face growing hot again. I see. That explains why it was in our historical database. Again, I'm deeply sorry. What interests me, Lyra said, moving slightly closer, is why you chose that specific phrase. Of all the expressions you could have selected, why one about eating? The reception included a dinner, Ethan explained. I thought a compliment related to dining etiquette would be contextually appropriate. Lyra's eyes shifted to a lighter shade of violet. A logical assumption, though an unfortunate one. In our culture, references to oral movements carry particularly intimate connotations. She tilted her head slightly. But I'm curious what made you want to speak to me in our language, rather than relying on Standard Galactic? The question caught Ethan off guard. I believe that making an effort to communicate in someone's native tongue shows respect and genuine interest in their culture, even if my attempt was catastrophically misguided. Something in Lyra's posture relaxed. That perspective is commendable if the execution was flawed. Many species don't bother to learn even basic phrases in Zillion. They find our language too difficult or claim our vocal structures are incompatible. Your language is complex but beautiful, Ethan said honestly. The way tonal variations can completely change meaning reminds me of ancient Earth languages like Mandarin or Vietnamese. Lyra's eyes brightened with genuine interest. You've studied comparative linguistics. It was a secondary focus during my training. I believe that understanding how different species communicate the underlying structures and cultural contexts of their languages is essential to meaningful diplomacy. For the first time since their disastrous introduction, Lyra's posture displayed something approaching comfort. Perhaps your cultural education isn't entirely lacking, despite tonight's evidence to the contrary. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. I assure you my usual approach involves more research and less accidental proposition. A ripple of color passed across Lyra's skin, the Zillion equivalent of laughter Ethan recalled from his studies. Her eyes shifted to a warmer purple. About the Lumina ritual, I should explain that while your statement did technically initiate the declaration phase, such beginnings can be withdrawn without consequence, if both parties agree. I would very much appreciate such a withdrawal, Ethan said with feeling. Consider it done. Lyra made a graceful gesture with her slender hands. Though Ambassador Thrall will likely request some form of formal acknowledgement. Whatever is necessary to repair this diplomatic faux pas. Lyra seemed about to respond when a ship-wide announcement interrupted. Attention all personnel and guests. We have received an urgent communication from Gronak High Command. A representative vessel is approaching and requests immediate docking for diplomatic talks. All senior staff and cultural liaisons report to Docking Bay 3 in 20 minutes. Ethan and Lyra exchanged concerned glances. The Gronaks were a warrior species known for their direct approach to interstellar politics. Their sudden arrival during a diplomatic function was unprecedented. We should return to Ambassador Thrall. Lyra suggested, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. The presence of Gronaks will significantly alter the diplomatic dynamics of this gathering. As they hurried back toward the Grand Dome, Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. While he had apparently resolved the immediate crisis, he found himself unexpectedly reluctant to end his conversation with Lyra. Despite the humiliating circumstances of their meeting, he had discovered a genuine intellectual connection with the Zillion cultural attaché. By the time they reached the Grand Dome, the atmosphere had transformed from one of cordial diplomacy to tense anticipation. Commander Hart was issuing rapid instructions to various officers, while Ambassador Thrall conferred with his delegation in hushed Zillion. Officer Vale, Commander Hart called when she spotted him. The situation has evolved. The Gronak delegation is led by General Krog himself, their supreme military commander. You and Cultural Attaché Lyra will join the receiving party. Us, Ethan, couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Wouldn't more senior diplomats be appropriate? Ambassador Chen remains indisposed, and the Gronaks have specifically requested representatives familiar with cultural protocols. Given your eventful introduction to the Zillions, perhaps you can avoid similarly complicating our relations with the Gronaks. The commander's tone left no room for argument. Yes, Commander. I'll be more careful with my phraseology this time. See that you are. The Gronaks tend to respond to perceived insults by issuing combat challenges, rather than merely changing colors. With that encouraging thought, Ethan found himself hurrying toward the docking bay, alongside Lyra Commander Hart and several other officers. The Zillion moved with fluid grace, even at their accelerated pace, making Ethan acutely aware of his comparatively ungainly human gait. Have you had much interaction with Gronaks? He asked Lyra as they entered a transport lift. Limited but significant, she replied. Our worlds engaged in territorial negotiations 2 years ago. They respect straightforward communication and physical prowess. Noted, Ethan said. I'll avoid attempting to speak their language altogether. The faintest ripple of color, that subtle Zillion laughter, passed across Lyra's skin. A wise precaution. Their primary greeting translates roughly to, I acknowledge your capacity to kill me. Charming. The docking bay was a flurry of activity when they arrived. Security personnel had taken strategic positions around the perimeter, while technical crews prepared for the Gronak vessel's arrival. Through the massive transparent doors, Ethan could see the approaching ship, a brutally efficient design, with none of the aesthetic considerations that characterized most spacefaring civilizations' crafts. Remember, Commander Hart instructed, as they formed a receiving line, maintain direct eye contact with the Gronax at all times. Submissive body language is interpreted as weakness, while excessive aggression is seen as a challenge. Aim for confident neutrality. The docking procedure completed with military precision. As the massive doors cycled open, Ethan braced himself for the first sight of the infamous Gronak warriors. They did not disappoint. General Cragg led his delegation with imposing presence, his massive frame nearly twice the height of an average human. Like all Gronaks, his leathery skin bore the ritual scarification that documented his battle history, an impressive collection that covered most of his visible epidermis. His 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern on his angular face, surveyed the receiving party with calculated assessment. Commander Hart stepped forward. "General Cragg, the Astra Concordia, welcomes you and your warriors. I am Commander Hart, Executive Officer of this vessel." The general's gravelly voice filled the docking bay. "Your welcome is acknowledged, Commander. The urgency of our arrival warrants explanation. We bring intelligence of critical importance to multiple council species." He gestured to a smaller Gronak, who carried what appeared to be a secure data module. "Information has reached us regarding a new threat from the Vortex Legion. Their void ships have been detected at the edges of 3 different territories, including your own Earth space." A tense silence followed this announcement. The Vortex Legion, a coalition of species dedicated to the supremacy of their religious and political ideologies, had been a growing concern for the Galactic Council over the past decade. "This information requires immediate verification and response," Commander Hart said. "We have representatives from several council species aboard for a diplomatic function. Perhaps we should convene an emergency session." General Craig's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of agreement. "The threat concerns us all. However, before we proceed, there is another matter." His gaze shifted to Ethan and Lyra. "Our intelligence networks have registered an unusual diplomatic incident between your species tonight. According to our information, a declaration of Lumina has been initiated." Ethan felt a cold shock run through him. How could the Gronax possibly know about his blunder? It had occurred barely an hour ago. Commander Hart intervened smoothly. "A minor cultural misunderstanding, General. Already resolved between the parties involved." "Not resolved," came Ambassador Thrall's voice as he approached from behind them. "Merely postponed. The Lumina Declaration, once spoken, creates spiritual resonance that must be properly addressed." General Craig's expression shifted to what Ethan recognized from his briefings as Gronak interest. "Fascinating. Among our people, such misunderstandings are settled through trial of valor. Perhaps a similar resolution would be appropriate here." "Trial of valor?" Ethan asked, unease growing in his stomach. "A test of courage and skill," General Craig explained with evident relish. "To prove worthy of forgiveness, or worthy of pursuing the claim implied by your words." Before Ethan could protest that neither option reflected his intentions, Ambassador Thrall spoke again. "The suggestion has merit. In Zillion tradition, the rite of Lumina also involves demonstration of worthiness." "I've already apologized to Cultural Attaché Lyra," Ethan said quickly. "She has accepted my explanation and withdrawn from the ritual." All eyes turned to Lyra, whose skin displayed a complex pattern of colors that Ethan couldn't interpret. "I accepted that the offense was unintentional," she said carefully. "However, as Ambassador Thrall notes, the spiritual resonance remains unresolved." Commander Hart's expression made it clear that diplomatic necessity outweighed Ethan's personal comfort. What would this trial of valor entail exactly? General Craig's mouth split in what approximated a smile on his fearsome features. "A simple test of skill and nerve. We have brought a shuttle simulator programmed with our asteroid navigation course. Officer Vale would demonstrate his worthiness by successfully navigating the virtual field." "And if I fail?" Ethan asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Failure would constitute formal rejection of the Lumina claim and require immediate cessation of all personal interaction with Cultural Attaché Lyra for the duration of our diplomatic mission." The general's 4 eyes blinked in sequence again. "A significant loss of face for Earth's diplomatic corps, but preferable to the traditional alternative." "Which is?" Commander Hart asked. "Ritual combat with her closest male relative," Ambassador Thrall supplied. "Traditionally to first blood, though historically, often to death." Ethan swallowed hard. "The simulator option sounds preferable." "Then it is decided," General Cragg announced with evident satisfaction. "The trial will commence in 1 hour. It will be witnessed by representatives of all 3 species to ensure proper cultural protocols are observed." As the impromptu council disbanded to prepare, Commander Hart pulled Ethan aside. "I don't need to emphasize how important this has become," she said in a low voice. "What began as an embarrassing gaffe has evolved into a diplomatic incident with multiple species now invested in the outcome." "I understand, Commander. I'll do my best with the simulator." "See that you do. And Vale." Her expression softened marginally. "For what it's worth, I believe your intentions were honorable, if your execution was catastrophically flawed." Left alone, Ethan tried to process the bizarre turn his evening had taken. What should have been a routine diplomatic function had somehow transformed into a personal trial with interstellar political implications. And at the center of it all was Lyra, the Zillion cultural attaché, whose violet eyes and quick mind had captured his attention despite the humiliating circumstances of their meeting. "Officer Vale," Lyra's melodic voice interrupted his thoughts. She had approached silently, as was the Zillion way. "I feel I should provide context for what you're about to undergo." "I'd appreciate that," Ethan said honestly. "This situation has spiraled well beyond my understanding." Lyra's skin rippled with a complex pattern that Ethan now recognized as discomfort. "The Gronak trial of valor is notoriously difficult. Their asteroid navigation courses are designed to test their own pilots, whose reflexes exceed human capabilities." "That's not encouraging." "However," she continued, "there is a pattern to their obstacle arrangements. They follow a mathematical sequence based on prime number intervals." She hesitated. "I noticed during our conversation that you have a genuine interest in understanding other cultures. Perhaps you might approach the simulator as a cultural text, rather than merely a reflex challenge." Ethan studied her multifaceted eyes, currently a thoughtful blue-violet. "Are you helping me?" A faint, purple blush spread across her cheeks. "I merely wish to see this unfortunate situation resolved with minimal diplomatic disruption." "Of course," Ethan nodded, though he suspected there might be more to her assistance than professional concern. "Thank you for the insight." An hour later, Ethan found himself strapped into a Gronak simulator pod that had been installed in one of the Astra Concordia's auxiliary control rooms. The interior was uncomfortably configured for Gronak physiology, with controls positioned for beings with greater reach and strength than the average human. Through the viewscreen he could see the assembled witnesses: Commander Hart looking tense, General Cragg anticipatory, Ambassador Thrall impassive, and Lyra concerned. It was difficult to interpret Zillion expressions, but her skin displayed the same pattern he had come to associate with discomfort. "The trial of valor begins," General Krog announced. "Officer Vale will navigate the Kirux asteroid field simulation. The course requires completion within 7 minutes, with no more than 2 collisions to be considered successful." The simulator hummed to life, surrounding Ethan with a startlingly realistic representation of space. Ahead loomed a dense field of virtual asteroids, spinning and colliding in apparent chaos. The control panel lit up, displaying Gronak symbols he could barely decipher. Remembering Lyra's advice, Ethan forced himself to look beyond the immediate danger. If there was a pattern based on prime numbers, it would manifest in the spacing and timing of the obstacles. He had studied mathematical universal constants during his training. Certain patterns appeared across diverse species and cultures because they reflected fundamental principles of the universe itself. The first asteroids approached with alarming speed. Rather than reacting instantly, Ethan observed their trajectories, noting the intervals between major obstacles. Yes, there it was. The primary bodies were indeed arranged according to a sequence he recognized. He began to navigate his movements, becoming more confident as he recognized the underlying order in the apparent chaos. The Gronak controls, while awkwardly positioned, responded well to his touch. The simulated shuttle wove between massive spinning rocks with increasing precision. 3 minutes in, Ethan had settled into a rhythm. The mathematical pattern wasn't merely spatial, but temporal as well, creating a four-dimensional puzzle that required constant adaptation. It was, he realized with sudden clarity, not unlike the complexities of cross-cultural communication, finding the coherent meaning beneath seemingly incompatible systems. The simulation ended with a jarring alert. Ethan had navigated the entire course with only one minor collision and outcome that, judging by the expressions of the observers, had been unexpected. General Craig's 4 eyes blinked rapidly as Ethan emerged from the simulator. Impressive human. Few non-Gronaks complete the Kiruk simulation successfully on first attempt. Thank you, General, Ethan replied, careful to maintain the direct eye contact the Gronaks respected. Your people's approach to navigation reveals much about your cultural values, finding order within chaos, strength through precision. The General's expression shifted to what Ethan recognized as pleasure. You understand the deeper purpose of the trial. Perhaps there is more to Earth diplomacy than we had believed. Commander Hart stepped forward, obvious relief in her bearing. Does this successful completion resolve the matter to your satisfaction, General? From the Gronak perspective, yes. Officer Vale has demonstrated valor, worthy of pursuing his claim. The General turned his attention to Ambassador Thrall. Does the Zillion tradition concur? Ambassador Thrall's multifaceted eyes shifted to a contemplative amber. The trial satisfies the requirement for external validation, but the rite of Lumina has additional components. The demonstration phase requires proof of spiritual compatibility. Ethan fought to keep his expression neutral, despite his growing frustration. What would this demonstration entail? A mind-sharing ritual conducted by our Elder Loomis, the ambassador explained. He would create a psychic bridge allowing cultural attaché Lyra to experience your true intentions and spiritual essence. Lyra stepped forward, her skin showing the now familiar pattern of discomfort. Ambassador, such rituals are traditionally reserved for formal bonding ceremonies. Perhaps a modified version would be more appropriate under these circumstances. Ethan caught the subtle shift in her tone. She was attempting to offer him a way out, or at least a less invasive alternative. The situation is unprecedented, Ambassador Thrall acknowledged. Perhaps Elder Loomis could perform a limited connection focused solely on resolving the Declaration resonance. Before Ethan could respond, an urgent alert sounded throughout the ship. Commander Hart activated her communication device immediately. Hart here. Report. The voice of the Astra Concordia's tactical officer came through clearly. Commander, long-range sensors have detected 3 vessels, matching Vortex Legion configurations, entering the system. Their current trajectory will bring them within weapons range in approximately 2 hours. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from ceremonial to crisis mode. It appears our intelligence was accurate, General Krog stated grimly. The Vortex Legion moves more boldly than anticipated. Commander Hart turned to the assembled diplomats. We need to convene an emergency council immediately. This threat concerns all our peoples. As they hurried toward the ship's conference center, Ethan found himself walking alongside Lyra. It seems our personal diplomatic incident has been overshadowed by larger concerns, he observed quietly. Perhaps, she replied, her voice equally low. Or perhaps they are connected in ways we don't yet understand. The conference center had been rapidly converted from its previous function as an exhibition space to accommodate the emergency meeting. Representatives from all species aboard the Astra Concordia had been summoned, creating an unprecedented gathering of diplomatic and military personnel. Commander Hart took charge of the proceedings with efficient authority. The situation is clear. 3 Vortex Legion vessels are approaching this system with unknown, but presumably hostile intent. We have representatives from 3 council species, present human Zillion and Gronak. I propose we use this opportunity to formulate a unified response. General Krog stepped forward. The Gronak position is straightforward. We must meet force with superior force. Our warrior ships can intercept. With respect, General Ambassador Thrall interrupted. Military engagement without council authorization would violate multiple treaties. The Zillion position favors diplomatic outreach, backed by defensive posturing. While they charge their primary weapons, the general countered, the Legion respects only strength. Ethan observed the rapidly deteriorating discourse with growing concern. Despite their shared threat, centuries of political and cultural differences were impeding a unified response. He glanced at Lyra and found her watching him, her multifaceted eyes reflecting similar thoughts. Perhaps, Ethan suggested, during a momentary lull, we might consider what the Vortex Legion expects from us. Their timing seems deliberately calculated to catch representatives of multiple species in one location. Commander Hart nodded thoughtfully. A valid observation, Officer Vale. They may be attempting to assess our capacity for unified action. Or lack thereof, Lyra added. Division among council species has long been their propaganda focus. Elder Loomis, who had remained silent until now, raised a gnarled hand. The ancient Zillion's skin had faded to a pale, translucent quality, with age, and his eyes shone with a wisdom that transcended species barriers. There is another possibility, he said, his voice surprisingly strong. The Vortex Legion operates on symbolic action as much as military strategy. Their arrival during an uncompleted Lumina ritual may carry significance in their interpretation of cosmic events. General Craig's expression registered skepticism. You suggest they time their military operations according to alien spiritual practices? I suggest, Elder Loomis replied with dignity, that they exploit divisions of all kinds, military, political, and spiritual. The uncompleted ritual between Officer Vale and cultural attaché Lyra represents a connection between our species left in limbic state, neither affirmed nor severed. A contemplative silence followed this observation. Are you proposing, Commander Hart asked carefully, that completing the ritual might have strategic value in our current crisis? Elder Loomis inclined his head. The Lumina ritual, when completed, creates a spiritual bond, recognized across multiple dimensional planes. In ancient times, such bonds were believed to generate protective resonances that repelled malevolent entities. General Krag snorted a sound like grinding stone. You suggest we fight warships with marriage ceremonies. I suggest, the elder clarified, that we employ every available resource, military, diplomatic, and spiritual. A completed Lumina bond between human and Zillion would demonstrate an alliance deeper than mere political convenience. All eyes turned to Ethan and Lyra. This is unexpected. Ethan managed struggling to maintain his diplomatic composure. While I'm willing to do whatever helps our current situation, I wouldn't want to pressure cultural attaché Lyra into a spiritual commitment based on strategic necessity. Lyra's skin displayed a complex pattern Ethan hadn't seen before, ripples of purple, mixed with flashes of golden light. The final phase of the Lumina ritual, the culmination, involves a joining of spiritual and physical energies. She explained, her voice carefully neutral. It is not undertaken lightly among my people. Nor would it be among mine, Ethan assured her. There must be alternatives that don't require such personal sacrifice. Commander Hart cleared her throat. While I appreciate the cultural sensitivities involved, we're facing an imminent threat. If Elder Loomis believes this ritual could help create a unified front against the Vortex Legion, we should consider it seriously. I will participate, Lyra said suddenly, her multifaceted eyes shifting to a determined violet. If Officer Vale is willing. Ethan studied her carefully, trying to discern whether her offer stemmed from diplomatic necessity or personal inclination. Are you certain this goes well beyond normal diplomatic protocol? A faint ripple of color, that subtle Zillian laughter passed across her skin. I believe we left normal diplomatic protocol behind when you first addressed me in the Grand Dome. The decision-made preparations began immediately. Elder Loomis required a specific environment for the ritual, one that blended elements familiar to both human and Zillian spiritual practices. The ship's botanical garden, with its diverse collection of flora from multiple worlds, provided a suitable setting. As the others departed to make their respective preparations for the approaching vortex vessels, Ethan found himself alone with Lyra in a quiet corridor. I feel I should apologize again, he said. What began as a simple mistake has now placed you in an impossible position. Lyra's eyes shifted to a warm violet. Perhaps not impossible. Unexpected certainly, but perhaps not without merit. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Merit? I have observed you carefully since our first encounter, she explained. Your response to the cultural misunderstanding revealed much about your character. You accepted responsibility without defensiveness. You approached the trial of valor with intelligence rather than mere bravado. And now, you show concern for my autonomy despite the pressure of our circumstances. Basic decency hardly seems worthy of special recognition, Ethan said. Yet it is rarer than you might imagine in interspecies relations. Lyra moved slightly closer, her iridescent skin catching the ambient light. The Lumina ritual cannot succeed without genuine spiritual resonance. Elder Loomis will attempt to create a bridge between our minds, but that bridge can only form if compatible elements already exist. Ethan felt a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. And you believe such elements might exist between us? I believe, Lyra said carefully, that your accidental proposition may have been more cosmically aligned than either of us initially recognized. The botanical garden had been transformed under Elder Loomis's direction. Soft illumination emanated from bioluminescent plants, arranged in specific patterns, while aromatic flowers from both Earth and Zillia released complementary scents. A shallow pool occupied the center of the space, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the simulated stars projected on the chamber's ceiling. Ethan arrived wearing a simple white garment provided by the Elder. He found Lyra already present, similarly attired in flowing white fabric that complemented her iridescent skin. Elder Loomis stood beside the pool, his ancient form seeming more substantial in this environment of his creation. Approach, the Elder instructed, his voice resonating with ceremonial gravity. As Ethan and Lyra moved to stand on opposite sides of the reflective pool, Elder Loomis raised his gnarled hands. The rite of Lumina has existed since before our species reached for the stars. It recognizes that spiritual connections transcend physical forms and cultural boundaries. He gestured for them to kneel at the pool's edge. The declaration has been spoken, however, unintentionally. The demonstration has been validated through the trial of valor. Now, we come to the culmination, the joining of spirits that may choose to inhabit the same cosmic space. Elder Loomis sprinkled a shimmering substance onto the pool's surface. The liquid began to glow with an internal light that shifted through the spectrum in patterns reminiscent of Zillian emotional displays. Place your hands upon the water's surface, he instructed. Do not break the tension, let your touch be light enough to connect with the energy rather than the substance. Ethan carefully extended his hands, allowing his fingertips to rest just at the threshold where surface tension held. Across the pool, Lyra did the same, her slender fingers creating the barest impression on the luminescent liquid. Elder Loomis began to chant in ancient Zillian, the musical qualities of the language enhanced by the garden's acoustic properties. As the chant continued, the light within the pool intensified, tendrils of luminescence rising to encircle their hands without breaking the water's surface. Now, the Elder said, switching to Standard Galactic, you will experience each other's essence. Open your minds to the connection. Resistance will cause discomfort. Acceptance will bring clarity. A tingling sensation spread from Ethan's fingertips, up his arms, eventually reaching his mind, like a cool wave washing away boundaries. His vision blurred, then cleared to reveal something extraordinary. He was simultaneously seeing, through his own eyes, and experiencing Lyra's perspective across the pool. More than visual perception flowed through the connection. Emotions, memories, and fundamental aspects of consciousness began to intermingle. He felt Lyra's initial embarrassment at his proposition, her professional concern over the diplomatic implications, her growing curiosity about him as a person, rather than merely a representative of humanity. Deeper still, he sensed her appreciation for his genuine interest in her culture, her surprise at his successful navigation of the Gronax simulator, and most unexpectedly, a growing attraction that had little to do with diplomacy and everything to do with personal connection. Ethan realized that Lyra must be experiencing a similar revelation of his inner landscape, his mortification at the cultural blunder, his admiration for her composure, his fascination with her intellect, and the subtle expressiveness of her iridescent skin. And yes, his own growing attraction, which had begun despite the awkward circumstances of their meeting and flourished through each subsequent interaction. The psychic bridge deepened, moving beyond surface thoughts and recent experiences to touch upon core values and beliefs. Ethan discovered that despite their different physiologies and cultural backgrounds, he and Lyra shared fundamental perspectives on the universe, a reverence for knowledge, a belief in meaningful connection across differences, a commitment to principles larger than individual or even species interests. The resonance is strong. Elder Loomis observed, his voice seeming to come from both within and without. The connection seeks culmination. Do you accept this path? The question penetrated to the center of the psychic bridge. Ethan felt Lyra's momentary hesitation, not from reluctance, but from awareness of the significance. This was no longer about diplomatic necessity or strategic advantage against the Vortex Legion. It had become something deeply personal. "I accept," Ethan said, the words forming simultaneously in his mind and on his lips. "I accept," Lyra echoed, her mental voice harmonizing with her spoken words in a way that sent ripples of golden light cascading through the psychic space they now shared. Elder Loomis placed his hands upon their heads. "Then, let the culmination commence. Two spirits choosing conscious intertwining across the boundaries of form and culture. May this union strengthen both and create harmonies previously unheard in the cosmic symphony." The luminescence from the pool intensified dramatically, surrounding Ethan and Lyra in a cocoon of light that pulsed with the rhythm of their now synchronized heartbeats. Physical sensation blurred as spiritual connection deepened, a merging that transcended conventional understanding of intimacy while simultaneously enhancing it. Through the connection, Ethan experienced Lyra's perception of the universe through Zillion, senses the multispectral vision that revealed layers of reality invisible to human eyes, the subtle vibrations her skin could detect in the surrounding environment, the musical complexities her hearing could distinguish in apparently simple sounds. In return, Lyra experienced his uniquely human perspective, the emotional resonances that colored his perception, the intuitive leaps his mind made between seemingly unrelated concepts, the profound sense of wonder that had drawn him to interstellar diplomacy. Neither could have described how long the culmination lasted. Time itself seemed to operate differently within the ritual space. When the luminescence finally began to fade, returning them gradually to normal perception, both felt fundamentally changed. The psychic bridge had receded, but not disappeared entirely, leaving a subtle connection that hummed with potential. Elder Loomis helped them to their feet, his ancient eyes shining with satisfaction. "The lumina is complete. You are joined in a bond recognized across dimensions. Such connections have been rare in recent generations, especially between different species." Ethan looked at Lyra, seeing her now, with both his physical eyes and the lingering awareness from their connection. Her iridescent skin glowed with a warm, golden hue. He now understood signified profound contentment, and her multifaceted eyes displayed the exact violet shade associated with deepest affection in Zillion emotional language. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice soft. "Now," Elder Loomis replied with gentle authority, "you face the approaching danger as a unified entity, a living embodiment of the alliance we seek to preserve." As if on cue, the ship's communication system activated. "Elder Loomis," came Commander Hart's voice, "is the ritual complete? The Vortex vessels will be within range in 20 minutes. "It is complete," the Elder confirmed. "And most successfully so. We will join you in the command center immediately." The command center of the Astra Concordia buzzed with tense activity when they arrived. Commander Hart stood at the central console, reviewing tactical displays with General Krag and Ambassador Thrall. All three looked up as Ethan Lyra and Elder Loomis entered. "The Lumina ritual is complete," Elder Loomis announced. "A true bond has formed." General Krag studied them with his 4 eyes. "They look different," he observed. "The human stance has acquired Zillion fluidity. The Zillion's movements show human decisiveness." It was true, Ethan realized. The psychic bridge had left subtle influences on both their physical presentations. He could feel echoes of Lyra's graceful movement patterns, integrated into his own motor control, while she had adopted some of his more direct gestural language. Fascinating as this anthropological observation is, Commander Hart interjected, "We have more pressing concerns. The Vortex vessels are maintaining their approach vector. They have not responded to hails in any recognized frequency or protocol." Ambassador Thrall's multifaceted eyes shifted to a concerned amber. "Their weapon signatures are active, though not yet locked. They appear to be in assessment mode, rather than immediate attack posture." "They're evaluating our response," General Krag growled, "testing our unity before deciding their approach." Ethan and Lyra exchanged glances, a flash of shared understanding passing between them through their lingering connection. Commander Ethan said, "If I may suggest, the Vortex Legion's ideology centers on purity and separation. Their entire philosophy rejects the kind of integration the Council represents." Lyra continued his thought seamlessly. "They particularly oppose spiritual connections between species. Their sacred texts describe such bonds as corruption of cosmic order." Elder Loomis nodded sagely. "The newly formed Lumina bond would be especially offensive to their doctrines. It represents exactly the kind of integration they seek to prevent." "Are you suggesting we use your bond as a diplomatic weapon?" Commander Hart asked, skepticism evident in her tone. "Not a weapon," Ethan clarified. "A demonstration. The Vortex Legion bases its power on the belief that different species cannot truly unite beyond political convenience. They exploit the natural tensions between our cultures. The Lumina bond disproves their fundamental premise," Lyra added. "If they could be made to witness it directly." General Krag slammed his massive fist on the console, causing several officers to jump. "Brilliant, a psychological strike at their ideological foundation." Ambassador Thrall appeared less convinced. "How would you propose to make them witness your bond? They haven't responded to conventional communication attempts." Elder Loomis stepped forward. "The Lumina connection generates specific energy patterns that can be amplified and projected. Their vessels would detect these patterns on their sensor arrays, which are calibrated to identify spiritual energies. It is, after all, part of their doctrine to detect what they consider corruption." "It's worth attempting," Commander Hart decided. "Our other options grow limited as they approach. What do you need to make this happen?" Under Elder Loomis's direction, the ship's engineers modified the communication array to project the unique energy signature of the Lumina bond. Ethan and Lyra were connected to specialized equipment that amplified the subtle resonance between them, transforming it into a signal that could reach the approaching vessels. "The projection is active," the communications officer announced. "Energy patterns stabilized and broadcasting on all frequencies." Tense minutes passed as they monitored the Vortex vessel's approach. Suddenly, the tactical officer called out, "Movement change. The lead vessel is decelerating. The others are following suit." "They've detected the signal," Elder Loomis said with satisfaction. Now they must reconcile it with their doctrine. Another alert sounded. Incoming transmission, the communications officer reported. Standard galactic protocol. On screen, Commander Hart ordered. The main display activated to reveal a severe-looking humanoid figure with distinctive ridged features and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. This is Hierarch Zovax of the Vortex Legion Vanguard. We detect an abomination aboard your vessel, a spiritual contamination that violates cosmic law. Commander Hart stepped forward. This is Commander Hart of the Earth diplomatic vessel Astra Concordia. What you detect is a lumina bond between our peoples, a sacred union recognized across the galaxy for millennia. Such unions are forbidden, the Hierarch hissed. They corrupt the purity of species destiny. Yet they exist, Elder Loomis interjected, moving into view of the transmission. And have existed since before your legion formed its first doctrine. What you call contamination, the ancient traditions recognize as transcendent harmony. The Hierarch's glowing eyes narrowed. The ancients were misguided. Separation is the natural order. Ethan felt a subtle prompting through his connection with Lyra. Together, they stepped into the transmission field. If separation is natural, Ethan said, then how do you explain what stands before you? We represent what your doctrine claims cannot exist, Lyra continued. A true union across the boundaries you believe are absolute. Through their bond, they projected a unified presence that even the communication system's limited bandwidth couldn't fail to transmit. The Hierarch visibly recoiled. Impossible, he muttered. Our sensors must be malfunctioning. Your sensors are accurate, Elder Loomis stated firmly. What you perceive threatens not the cosmic order, but merely your interpretation of it. The universe itself recognizes and supports such bonds. That is why the energy patterns are so distinctive. A long silence followed as the Hierarch appeared to consult with others off-screen. When he returned his attention to the transmission, his demeanor had subtly changed. This phenomenon requires further study. Our doctrine may contain interpretive flexibility previously unexplored. He straightened his posture. We will withdraw to consultation distance and request a formal diplomatic exchange to discuss these matters further. The transmission ended, and the tactical officer immediately reported, Vortex vessels are altering course. They're establishing a holding position at the system's edge, well outside weapons range, but maintaining communication distance. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the command center. Well done, Commander Hart said, genuine respect in her voice, as she turned to Ethan and Lyra. Your unique situation has apparently created a diplomatic opportunity where we expected only conflict. General Cragg laughed a rumbling sound like distant thunder. The Vortex Legion retreating in the face of a marriage bond. Our warrior poets will compose epics about this day. Not retreating, Ambassador Thrall corrected his eyes, showing thoughtful amber. Reassessing, which represents a more significant victory than any military engagement could have achieved. As the crisis subsided and the command center returned to normal operations, Ethan and Lyra found themselves once again in a quiet corridor, processing the extraordinary sequence of events that had transformed their lives in less than 12 hours. From cultural misunderstanding to cosmic bond that repels enemy fleets, Ethan mused. Not exactly how I expected my diplomatic career to progress. Lyra's skin rippled with that subtle laughter he had come to cherish. Perhaps your initial proposition wasn't as catastrophic as it appeared. On the contrary, Ethan replied with a smile. It was absolutely catastrophic, just in a surprisingly positive direction. Through their bond, he felt her amusement, affection, and a trace of uncertainty about their future. What happens now? She asked unconsciously, echoing his earlier question after the ritual. I imagine we'll both face extensive debriefings, formal documentation of the unprecedented diplomatic development, and probably years of scientific and cultural study as the first human Zillion Lumina bond. Beyond the official response, Lyra clarified. What happens with us? Ethan took her hands in his, feeling the connection between them hum with renewed energy at the physical contact. I may have initiated our relationship with an accidental proposition, but nothing about my feelings now is accidental or diplomatic. If you're willing to explore this bond beyond its strategic value, I would very much like to discover where it leads. Lyra's multifaceted eyes shimmered with violet warmth. I believe that would be a most fascinating exploration, Cultural Relations Officer Vale. 6 months later, the observation deck where they had first attempted to resolve their cultural misunderstanding was the setting for a more joyous announcement. Friends and colleagues from multiple species gathered as Ethan and Lyra shared their news. The medical team confirms that our genetic compatibility enhanced by the Lumina bond has resulted in successful conception. Lyra announced her iridescent skin, glowing with the golden patterns of profound happiness. We are expecting the first naturally conceived human Zillion child. The gathering erupted in congratulations. Commander Hart, recently promoted to captain, following the successful peace negotiations with the Vortex Legion, raised a glass in toast to the newest symbol of interspecies harmony and living proof that even diplomatic disasters can yield miraculous results. Elder Loomis, who had agreed to remain aboard the Astra Concordia as spiritual advisor to the unprecedented family unit, nodded in satisfaction. The child of Lumina will carry the harmonics of both worlds in its very being, a living embodiment of the unity we seek across the stars. General Krag, now serving as the Gronak ambassador to the expanded council that included former Vortex Legion worlds, slapped Ethan on the back with carefully restrained force. The warrior who navigates cultural asteroids now navigates parenthood. Another trial of valor, my friend. As the celebration continued around them, Ethan and Lyra stood by the transparent wall that revealed the vast starscape beyond. Through their bond, they shared thoughts too personal for public expression, their hopes for their child, their still growing understanding of each other's worlds, and the profound gratitude for the linguistic mistake that had set them on this unexpected path. I've been meaning to ask, Ethan said quietly, a mischievous glint in his eye. What exactly does "when your lips move like a star dancer" mean in contemporary Zillion? Lyra's skin flushed with a faint purple. The literal translation is quite explicit. Suffice to say, it references certain intimate activities performed with considerable enthusiasm and skill. No wonder you choked on your drink, Ethan laughed. The most surprising element wasn't the proposition itself, Lyra admitted, but rather that it came from the seemingly proper human diplomat who had just been introduced. Bold opening strategy. Evidently effective in the long term. She countered, her multifaceted eyes glinting with humor. Beyond the observation window, the stars shimmered in the void, each a potential home to civilizations waiting to be discovered, understood, and perhaps sometimes accidentally propositioned in their native languages. For Ethan and Lyra, one linguistic disaster had opened a doorway to a connection that transcended cultural boundaries, proved strong enough to avert interstellar conflict, and now promised to bring new life into the universe. As they prepared to join another diplomatic gathering, this time as honored representatives of successful interspecies cooperation, rather than cultural relations officers, they shared a moment of private connection through their bond. Whatever challenges awaited them in raising the galaxy's first naturally conceived human Zillion child, they would face them together, their accidental beginning having evolved into a deliberately chosen path forward among the stars.